When Jonathan Roumie noticed a 12-year-old girl standing on a Chicago street corner holding a sign that read, "Jesus was crazy," he slowed his car, pulled over, and spoke to her in a way that reached her deeply. His calm and thoughtful response moved her to tears and started a conversation that would leave a lasting impact on both of them. By the end, the question she asked surprised even the actor known for portraying Jesus, highlighting what felt like perfect timing. This story is not simply about an actor encountering an upset child with a protest sign. It is about words delivered with care that softened a young girl's anger. It is about a moment of compassion that opened her heart. And it shows how unexpected meetings can carry meaningful purpose. What follows demonstrates how truth shared with kindness can change everything. 3 hours earlier, Sofia Martinez had rushed out of St. Catherine's Catholic School, gripping a poster board she had taken from the art supply closet. Her religion teacher, Sister Mary Catherine, had just explained that Jesus was perfect, without sin, and the example for all human behavior. To Sofia those words felt painful and abrasive. "If Jesus is so perfect," she had shouted, "then why didn't he stop my dad from leaving?" The room went quiet. 23 classmates stared at the girl whose father had left 6 months earlier, leaving unpaid bills and a daughter who felt abandoned and blamed God for not stepping in. Sister Mary Catherine tried to comfort her, speaking gently about God's plan and the idea that some things cannot be easily understood. But Sofia was no longer able to listen. She grabbed her backpack and ran out of the school, overwhelmed by anger and driven by a sense that she needed to act. If Jesus was truly loving and powerful, she wondered, why did good people suffer while others seemed untouched by consequences? The poster board became her chosen way to express that anger. Using a thick red marker from her mother's purse, she wrote a message aimed at a God she felt had failed her when she needed help the most. The busy intersection of Clark and Diversey felt like the right place to make her point, with hundreds of people passing by each hour. Sofia stood on the corner, holding the sign above her head and staring down anyone who looked her way. Most people avoided eye contact and kept walking, while a few stopped to take photos, which only strengthened her resolve. She had been there for about 2 hours when an old Honda Civic with Illinois plates stopped at the red light in front of her. The driver did something she did not expect. Instead of checking his phone or focusing on getting somewhere quickly, he looked directly at her sign. His expression was calm and attentive, and Sofia found herself unsure of what he was thinking. Not anger or surprise, but something closer to recognition crossed his face. When the traffic light turned green, instead of driving on, he pulled over to the curb and got out of his car. Sofia felt her heart speed up as she realized the stranger was walking directly toward her. Still, his relaxed and steady manner kept her rooted in place. "That's a strong message you're holding," Jonathan said as he came closer, keeping his hands visible and his posture open. "I'm Jonathan, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about Jesus myself." Sofia lifted her chin, ready for a lecture about respect or wrongdoing, just like she was used to hearing from adults. "What are you, some kind of preacher?" she asked, her voice carrying the guarded sharpness of someone who had been let down more than once. Jonathan smiled, and there was a sincerity in it that made her defenses ease just a bit. "Actually, I'm an actor," he said, settling comfortably against a nearby lamppost. "I play Jesus on a show called The Chosen. So I've been studying him pretty closely for several years now." Sofia's eyes widened slightly. She had heard of the series even though she had never watched it. "So, you're famous?" she asked, briefly distracted from her anger by the idea of meeting someone well known. Jonathan laughed softly and motioned toward his old Honda and thrift store jacket. "That might be overstating it. Some people recognize the show." "Well then," Sofia replied, lifting her sign higher as she tried to return to her defiant posture, "you should be upset with me. I'm saying the person you play was crazy." Jonathan nodded slowly as if he were considering her words instead of rejecting them. "You know, Sofia," he said even though she had not told him her name. She lowered the sign slightly. "How do you know my name?" she asked. Jonathan pointed to the school logo stitched on her uniform shirt, then to the small name tag still clipped to her backpack from a recent field trip. "St. Catherine's and your name tag," he explained kindly. "And you also look like someone who's been dealing with some big questions." The comment struck closer than she expected, and she felt her emotional guard begin to weaken. "So what if I am?" she responded, though her voice no longer carried the same edge. "There's nothing wrong with asking questions, especially about things that matter," Jonathan said calmly. "Honestly, questioning shows you care. The people I worry about are the ones who never question anything at all." This was not the reaction Sofia expected from someone whose job was to portray the Son of God. "But you still think I'm wrong about Jesus being crazy, right?" she asked, watching his face for the judgment she assumed would follow. Jonathan paused, glancing at the steady flow of traffic as he chose his words carefully. Before I answer that, he said, turning back to her, let me ask you something. What made you decide Jesus was crazy? What's your evidence? Sophia was caught off guard by the request for evidence and briefly struggled to organize her thoughts. Well, he claimed to be God, didn't he? She replied, regaining her confidence. He talked to people who weren't there. He said he could forgive sins. And he allowed himself to be killed even though he supposedly had all this power. To her, the argument sounded logical, the kind of reasoning her science teacher often encouraged. Jonathan listened closely, nodding as though he were carefully following her line of thought. Those are solid points, Jonathan said, which surprised her. By most standards, those things could definitely sound crazy. He paused again, considering his next words. But here's what's always troubled me about that explanation, he continued. I've been studying Jesus for years, reading everything I can find. The more I learn, the more I realize that the crazy theory doesn't fully add up. What do you mean? Sophia asked, despite herself becoming genuinely interested. Jonathan gestured toward a nearby bus stop bench. After a brief hesitation, she walked over and sat beside him. Think about it, he said. People who are truly unstable usually have disorganized thinking. Their ideas don't connect well. They're unpredictable and often can't sustain relationships. Sophia nodded, thinking of her uncle who lived with mental illness and whose thoughts often jumped without clear links. But when you look closely at what Jesus said and did, Jonathan went on, his thinking is remarkably consistent. His teachings connect with each other. He formed strong friendships, and even his critics acknowledged his intelligence. Sophia frowned, unwilling to give up her position so easily. What about the supernatural parts? She challenged. Walking on water. Raising the dead. That sounds unrealistic. Jonathan smiled, clearly engaged in the discussion rather than offended. You know what's interesting? He said. I used to think the same way. Before I played Jesus, I assumed those stories were just metaphors, legends, or hopeful imagination. Sophia looked at him, surprised by his openness. So what changed your mind? She asked, leaning in slightly. Research, Jonathan answered simply. And a few experiences I can't easily explain. What kind of experiences? Sophia pressed, her curiosity starting to outweigh her skepticism. Jonathan fell silent for a moment, as if deciding how much to share with a 12-year-old he had only just met. Well, there was a time when we were filming a scene where Jesus heals a blind man, Jonathan began. It was just acting, nothing more. There was an extra on set, an older man who had been legally blind for 30 years. Sophia felt a sudden chill, though she couldn't explain why. During the lunch break, he came up to me and asked if I would pray for him, Jonathan continued, his voice becoming quieter. Not because he thought I was actually Jesus, but because he said the way I was portraying him felt real to him. Sophia held her breath, waiting for what came next. So I prayed for him, Jonathan said. I felt awkward, honestly. And when he opened his eyes, he could see. The statement seemed to linger between them, challenging everything Sophia believed about how the world worked. That's impossible, she said, though her voice lacked confidence. People don't suddenly regain their sight after 30 years. Jonathan nodded. That's what we thought too. The medical team on set examined him. Doctors at the hospital ran tests and no one could explain it. He looked directly at her. But here's the thing, Sophia. Things people call impossible still happen around Jesus, even today. She felt a mix of curiosity and unease rise in her chest, feelings she tried to push away. Even if that did happen, Sophia said, trying to return to her earlier certainty, it still doesn't prove Jesus wasn't crazy. Maybe he was crazy in a way that somehow works. Jonathan laughed softly, the sound warm and sincere. You know, you might be onto something, he said. Maybe Jesus was crazy, but maybe he's the kind of crazy the world really needs. This was not where Sophia expected the conversation to go, and despite herself, she felt drawn in. Think about it, Jonathan continued. In a world where people stockpile wealth while others go hungry, Jesus says to give to the poor. That sounds crazy. Sophia nodded, thinking of her mother struggling to cover rent after her father left. In a world driven by revenge and grudges, Jesus says to forgive your enemies and pray for those who hurt you. That's also crazy. She thought about her own anger toward her father and how impossible forgiveness felt. And in a world where people constantly judge each other, Jesus says to love everyone without conditions. By normal standards, that sounds completely unreasonable. So you're saying Jesus was crazy but in a good way? Sophia asked, trying to make sense of it. I'm saying maybe the issue isn't that Jesus was crazy, Jonathan replied. Maybe the issue is that the rest of us are, and Jesus was the only truly sane one in a world that isn't. The idea struck Sophia hard, forcing her to rethink what she believed about logic and sanity. She looked down at her sign, and the bold red words no longer felt as certain or as strong. But what about my dad? Sophia asked suddenly, the question behind her anger finally coming out. If Jesus is loving and powerful, why didn't he keep my family together? Her voice broke and tears threatened to fall. Jonathan's face softened with real concern. I'm so sorry, Sophia, he said gently. That kind of pain is very real. The kindness in his voice broke through her control and tears began to fall. He just left, she whispered. One day he was there and the next he was gone. He won't even answer my calls. Jonathan quietly reached into his pocket, took out a small pack of tissues, and offered them to her without saying a word. My mom cries every night and I can hear her through the walls. I prayed again and again for God to bring him back, but nothing changed. The pain in her voice was immediate and unfiltered, the kind that comes from a child whose trust has been broken. So where was Jesus then? She asked. Where was all his love and power when I needed it most? Jonathan stayed silent for a long moment, clearly choosing his words with care. You know what, Sophia? I don't know where Jesus was when your dad left, he said honestly. I don't understand why God allows people to hurt each other, especially when children are caught in the middle. His honesty caught her off guard. She had expected familiar phrases about God's plan or everything happening for a reason. If you're still watching this conversation that's changing everything, and you've ever felt abandoned by God when you needed him most, go ahead and like this video and comment the word honesty below. Let's see how many of us believe it's okay to bring real questions and real pain to God. But I do know one thing, Jonathan continued. Jesus knows exactly how you feel right now. Sophia looked up through her tears, confused. What do you mean? Jesus had a father who wasn't there for him too, Jonathan said gently. Not in the same way as your situation, but when Jesus was dying on the cross, he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Sophia had never heard that part of the story, and it felt unexpectedly comforting. He felt abandoned just like you do, Jonathan went on. He felt like his father had left him when he needed him most. The connection between her pain and Jesus's experience was something she had never considered, and it eased the tight feeling in her chest. So Jesus understands what it feels like when your dad doesn't show up? Sophia asked, wiping her nose with one of the tissues. He understands what it feels like when the person who's supposed to protect you and love you isn't there when you need them most, Jonathan replied. There was weight behind his words, shaped by personal experience, and Sophia wondered what kind of pain he carried himself. And maybe, he added, that's part of why Jesus cares so deeply about people who are hurting. She leaned in slightly, drawn to this new way of seeing the figure she had been protesting. But why doesn't he just fix everything? Sophia asked. If Jesus has all this power, why doesn't he make people stay together and love each other the way they should? Jonathan sighed, and it was clear this was a question he had struggled with himself. I think, he said slowly, it's because love that's forced isn't really love. The idea was complex for a 12-year-old, but something about it made sense to her. Your dad had to choose to stay, Jonathan continued. And for reasons we may never fully understand, he chose differently. That doesn't make it hurt less, Sophia said quietly. No, it doesn't, Jonathan agreed. And I think that's exactly why Jesus cares so much about people who are hurting. He paused, then asked gently, can I tell you something about my own dad? Sophia nodded, grateful for a momentary shift away from her own pain. My dad died when I was young, Jonathan said. And for years I was angry at God about it. I felt abandoned just like you do. What happened? Sophia asked, sensing this mattered. I blamed God for taking him away, Jonathan explained. I decided that if God existed at all, then he was either powerless or cruel. I spent years running from anything related to faith or religion. Sophia understood that urge to run from God and found herself listening closely. But then something happened that changed everything, Jonathan continued. I realized that my anger at God was actually proof that I believed in him. The idea made her pause. How is being angry at God proof that you believe in him? She asked, genuinely confused. Because you can't be angry at someone who doesn't exist, Jonathan said with a gentle smile. I was angry because deep down I expected God to be good, loving, and protective. Sophia felt a quiet recognition in his words, as if he were describing her own feelings. And when bad things happened, Jonathan added, it felt like betrayal, because I believed God was supposed to be better than that. She began to understand that her anger toward Jesus, her need to make the sign and stand on that corner, all came from the same place of unmet expectations and deep disappointment. So you're saying that being angry at Jesus means I actually believe in him? Sophia asked, recognizing the irony in her own words. I'm saying that the fact you're holding that sign, that you care enough to be angry, suggests Jesus matters to you more than you might want to admit, Jonathan replied. People don't usually get upset about fictional characters unless those characters represent something real and meaningful to them. Sophia looked down at her sign again, now seeing it less as an act of rebellion and more as evidence of belief. The realization unsettled her, yet it also brought an unexpected sense of comfort. But I still don't understand why God allows bad things to happen to good people, Sophia said, giving voice to the question that had troubled her for months, especially to kids who didn't do anything wrong. Jonathan nodded, recognizing the weight of the question. You know what, Sophia? I don't think anyone fully understands that, he said. But I've learned something about Jesus that helps me when I struggle with it. She waited, hoping for something that might ease the confusion she felt. Jesus didn't stay on the sidelines while people suffered, Jonathan explained. He stepped directly into human pain and experienced it himself. Sophia thought about what she had learned in religion class about Jesus' life. He was born into poverty. His family misunderstood him. He was betrayed by friends. He died a painful death. So when you're hurting, Jonathan continued, Jesus isn't watching from a distance. He's with you because he's already been there. This view of Jesus as someone who suffered alongside others, rather than a distant judge, was new to Sophia and began to change how she understood him. So when my dad left and I felt abandoned, Jesus felt that too? Sophia asked, testing this new idea. When I felt like no one understood or cared, Jesus understood because he'd felt it himself? Jonathan nodded, his expression full of compassion. And when you made that sign because you were angry, hurt, and confused, Jesus understood that too. He asked his own hard questions when he was suffering. Sophia felt a quiet warmth in her chest, as if something long frozen was starting to loosen. In fact, Jonathan added softly, I think Jesus might look at your sign and think, finally, someone being honest about how difficult this really is. The thought that Jesus might value her honesty instead of condemning her actions was a powerful shift for Sophia. So you don't think he's mad at me for saying he's crazy? She asked. I think he's probably glad you care enough to wrestle with who he is instead of ignoring him, Jonathan answered. In the Bible, Jesus wasn't frustrated with people who questioned him. He was frustrated with those who claimed to have all the answers but didn't actually love others. This distinction was new to Sophia, and it felt like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known was there. Jonathan, she said, using his name for the first time, can I ask you something else? He nodded, encouraging her to continue. If you were me and you were angry at Jesus because your dad left, what would you do? Jonathan paused, understanding how much his answer mattered. I think, he said carefully, I would tell Jesus exactly how I felt, even if it wasn't polite or well-worded. Sophia's eyes widened. You mean like pray angry prayers? I mean being completely honest with God about everything you're feeling, Jonathan explained. Jesus can handle your anger, Sophia. He won't be shocked or offended by your pain. The idea that she could bring her full, messy emotions to God was something she had never heard before. In fact, Jonathan continued, I think he's been waiting for you to talk to him about it, instead of only talking about him to other people. As Jonathan spoke, something unusual seemed to settle over the moment. The noise of traffic around them faded into the background, and Sophia sensed something she couldn't fully explain, a feeling that was warm, welcoming, and patient. Do you feel that? Sophia whispered, glancing around as if expecting to see someone nearby. Jonathan smiled and she could tell he felt it too. That's Jesus, Sophia, he said softly. He's been here the whole time waiting for you to notice. Tears streamed down her face again, but these were different from the angry tears she had shed before. He's not mad at me for the sign? She asked quietly. He's just glad you're finally talking to him, Jonathan replied. And somehow Sophia felt completely certain that it was true. Without fully knowing why, she lowered the sign to the ground and closed her eyes. Jesus, she whispered, I'm really angry at you right now. I don't understand why you let my dad leave. The words felt risky and defiant but also freeing. I'm scared my mom is going to fall apart, and I don't know how to fix any of this. Jonathan gently rested a hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. Jonathan says you understand how I feel, she continued, and if that's true, then maybe you can help me know what to do next. As Sophia prayed honestly on the busy street corner, something shifted around them. The presence she had sensed grew stronger, more real, and she felt surrounded by a love so complete it left her breathless. I feel him, she said, opening her eyes and looking at Jonathan in amazement. I really feel Jesus here with us. Jonathan's face reflected quiet joy, his eyes filled with tears. He's always been here, Sophia, he said gently. You just needed to stop running long enough to notice. The change in her heart felt immediate and deep. What do I do now? Sophia asked, looking at the sign that had started everything. Do I throw it away? Do I act like I was never angry? Jonathan shook his head. No. I think you keep it, he said, surprising her. Keep it as a reminder that God can handle your questions and your anger. Sometimes the most honest prayers begin with admitting how lost we feel. Sophia picked up the sign and looked at it again. Maybe I could change it, she suggested. Maybe it could say something different. Jonathan went to his car, returned with a black marker, and handed it to her with a smile. What would you want it to say? She thought for a moment, then knelt on the sidewalk and began to write. When she finished, the sign read, Jesus was crazy. Crazy enough to love people like me. She held it up and Jonathan's smile widened. That, he said, is a sign I think Jesus would be proud of. The shift from protest to message felt remarkable. As they stood together, people passing by began to notice. Some stopped to read the sign. A few smiled or nodded. You know what's interesting? Jonathan said. You're still talking about Jesus, but now you're sharing good news instead of anger. Sophia realized he was right. Her journey from frustration to trust had become a story others could relate to, especially those who had never connected with traditional faith messages. I should probably head home, Sophia said after checking her phone. My mom will be worried. Jonathan nodded but paused. Sophia, can I tell you something important about your dad? She looked at him, curious. Jesus understands that your dad leaving wasn't because you weren't worth staying for. Sometimes adults make choices based on their own brokenness, and it has nothing to do with how valuable their children are. Those words touched a place she hadn't known was still hurting. Do you think Jesus can help my dad too? She asked. Even after everything? I do, Jonathan said with hope. Jesus is very good at helping broken people. And your prayers for your dad may be exactly what he needs right now. The idea that she could pray for her father instead of only feeling angry felt powerful. Maybe her anger had been the first step toward healing for both of them. In the months that followed, Sophia's change affected more than just her. At St. Catherine's she became known as the student who asked difficult questions. But now those questions came from genuine curiosity, not anger. Sister Mary Catherine often invited her to share her thoughts with younger students who were struggling. Sophia kept the sign in her bedroom, where it often sparked conversations with friends who had their own doubts about faith. Most unexpectedly, her prayers for her father began to lead to change. 3 months later, he called for the first time since leaving, wanting to talk about changes he was trying to make. Their relationship was still complicated and nothing was suddenly fixed, but it was a beginning, one Sophia recognized as an answer to prayer. She learned that sometimes God responds to deep pain not with instant solutions, but with the strength to hope and love while healing continues. If you've ever felt angry with God, or wondered whether faith makes sense in a world filled with suffering, remember Sophia's story. Sometimes anger toward God reflects a belief that he should be loving and present. And sometimes the most powerful step is being honest with him about doubt and pain, trusting that he is strong enough to handle our questions and compassionate enough to meet us there. What might change if you stopped running from God and started moving toward him with all your honest, complicated feelings? If this story meant something to you, consider subscribing for more faith-based stories that reveal hope in unexpected places. And in the comments, share a moment when doubt or frustration led you to deeper understanding. Your story may be exactly what someone else needs today.